Hello, hello, hello. I'm back. Thank you very much for your patience. It's a little bit random, a little bit late in the day, but I want to get this one out there. The short version, if you've looked at the description box, we've got the War on Children documentary today. Now, it's a little over a couple of hours long. It's been promoted very heavily over on X/Twitter. And it has been removed from a lot of the accounts over there. So luckily I had saved it, and talking to people back over in the West, they were looking for a copy that they could share to friends, family that aren't so quite on top of things. And when it was disappeared on them, it's thrown them into a loop. So here we go, guys. I'm going to put it out here. Let's see if it lasts. And I've got it showing live on both Luff's Bullshit and Sassy Cass. Luff's Bullshit is public and open, so that'll probably be the one that gets slapped first. Sassy Cass, it's an unlisted video, so it's link only. That is available out on the Telegram page, and I will attempt once I finish this premiere, I will attempt to drop it all in the description box. So it's out there. It's out there. Hopefully the unlisted version can hang around for a bit longer, and we can get this information in front of those who really need to see it. You know, this world it's just not getting any better, guys. We've got to fight it. We really do. Okay. Good to see everybody out in the chat there. Thanks for joining. It is quite rare, so it's good to see you. Yeah, thank you. I shut up now and go live on this one. Add the video in, shut myself up, and let's kick it off, shall we? Let me know if there's any issues in the chat. I'll be there.
Beautiful, full, spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. America, God shed His grace on thee. From sea to shining sea.
Some say ignorance is bliss. If you prefer that ignorant bliss, then now's the time to turn the TV off, because you'll have no excuse left by the end of this to not take your rightful place as a warrior protecting and preparing the next generation.
We're the Starbucks. We left the entertainment business because we knew that a silent war was being fought for the minds of America's children. And we knew that nothing would matter more than exposing it and stopping it.
That's why we're here now, to expose the war on children. How long has this been going on? How did it happen? Who's responsible? How far down the rabbit hole does this all go?
We know it's overwhelming, so let's start here.
First, you need to understand that one of the most effective forms of normalizing the woke agenda is via something called the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is a psychological phenomenon by which people tend to develop a preference for things or people that are more familiar to them than others. That means the more you show someone something, the more they start to like it or prefer it. This psychological mere exposure effect is the reason society is now flooded with imagery of what would have been considered fringe by most people only 10 years ago. I was a director in Hollywood for some of the biggest stars, so I speak from experience when I tell you that the mere exposure effect is how the media creates the reality we live in. Simply exposing the public to fringe concepts makes us normalize things that have never been considered normal before. This social engineering is how you make people see theories as facts, facts as theories, opinions as violence, silence as safety, and men as fully able to become women with the snap of their fingers. With the power of the mere exposure effect, you can make almost anyone believe anything with enough pressure and exposure. This makes it one of the most dangerous weapons that kids face today.
For instance, you might be wondering why some politicians propose seemingly ludicrous bills, like the one in Michigan threatening people with 5 years in prison for misgendering someone. It's not because they believe they can get away with it now. It's because they understand the process of normalizing prison over pronoun violations today so that it can become a reality in the future for the next generation. The mere exposure effect is why the concept of putting a screen in front of your child as a babysitter became normal. You saw people do it on TV when they were exhausted. You saw it in commercials. You saw it on social media. And then finally, it was normal. The mere exposure effect is also why Hollywood is flooding children's shows with woke agendas and sexual content, while most parents aren't looking because they have a trust bond with the shows they watched as a kid.
I'm Gonzarella. Calling me a she or a he doesn't feel right to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, I used the wrong name and pronouns.
Hey, Blue! Trans members of this family all love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big parade. Come join the fun!
The mere exposure effect is why Scholastic is featuring books pushing transgender ideology on kids. It's why Bugs Bunny was naked at a pride parade. It's why kids are bombarded with pharmaceutical ads on nearly every TV station. It's why the White House is flying a trans flag at the center of their flag display, and it's why nearly every corporation and sports team on the planet feels the need to create a custom pride logo that they use every June. It's why the Washington Post ran a piece encouraging kids to see kink at pride parades, and the New York Times ran a film review lamenting that the new Little Mermaid didn't have enough kink for their liking. It's why Target is selling trans pride toddler onesies and tuck-it swimsuits, and it's why they did TV shows and magazine covers to normalize sex changes for kids, but never did a show or cover updating you that those kids no longer identify as the sex they pretended to be on those shows or covers.
So why would corporations take part in this effort to destroy the fabric of reality as we know it? To find out, we sat down with Justin Danhoff. He's a Wall Street expert who's made it his mission to answer this question.
So how did wokeness take over corporate America?
It was a tripart takeover. It was bottom up, it was top down, and it was outside in. Top down, if you look at the banking industry, if you look at the past political affiliations of the board members, it's over 80% leaning to the left as opposed to the right. So there's no longer a balance at the top. What do I mean when I say bottom up? The same thing that's happening on college campus, we're now seeing on the corporate campuses, where conservatives, they keep their mouth shut. The woke employees, they feel very empowered because they now know the C-suite and the board agree with their woke positions. And then there's the outside in. When you talk about companies like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, you know, they're probably your largest shareholder, and they're demanding you take certain actions.
What is ESG and how is it used to push woke ideology?
It is social change by changing business behavior, by changing culture. So I, for example, went to the shareholder meetings of Amazon, Facebook, and Google. At all three of those meetings, they announced that they were adopting affirmative action policies for their board in reaction to shareholder proposals. Jesse Jackson was at 2 of those 3 meetings applauding. Why are shareholder proposals important? That's one reason. But they also move the cultural needle. Fast forward 3 years. That's when Goldman Sachs announced that they were no longer going to finance any company's IPO unless they had at least 2 diverse board seats in the terms of affirmative action. That's when NASDAQ put a rule in place where they said they are going to delist you from the exchange if you don't have 2 diverse board spots, one for a woman, one for an underrepresented minority.
Why is it that our kids today are faced with pride flags everywhere they go, no matter what, at every company?
Now, to keep your perfect score on the Corporate Equality Index, you have to have 3 events each year that promote the LGBTQ plus community. So, you've got your Super Bowl ads that have gotten crazy. There's one. You get your, flag up on all of your, social media and your website during Pride Month. You better find a third really quick before the year runs out, or you're going to lose your perfect score.
What happens if a company steps out of line and they don't do those 3 things?
They are tarred and feathered and shamed.
As a consumer, as a mom, it feels like corporate America has given us all a giant middle finger. Are they banking on us going back to those same buying behaviors after these Balenciaga and Target boycotts are over?
Yeah, they frankly are.
Talking with Justin got us thinking. How well do we know where our money is going when we shop at Target or get our insurance from State Farm? We looked and found that Target has given over $2 million to GLSEN, an organization that promotes schools secretly transitioning children and undermining parents, while State Farm went the extra mile after their donation to GLSEN by partnering with an organization called Gender Cool. The program that they supported gave LGBTQ plus books to kids as young as 5 years old to introduce concepts about gender identity and transitioning to them. These companies aren't alone, though. A quick look at GLSEN's website displayed sponsorships from Hollister, Disney, PetSmart, Gucci, YouTube, New Balance, Hulu, Amazon, Calvin Klein, Nickelodeon, Walmart, and many more. GLSEN also supports pornographic books in schools and opposes the removal of them. GLSEN is only one of the nonprofits using funds donated by corporate America to fundamentally change the reality we live in. These are other groups that many corporations are giving money to without your knowledge. Even Walmart has funded drag shows and gender ideology for kids.
Every once in a while, powerful people pull back the curtain to expose the plan. This video is one of those times.
In Davos a couple of years ago, Vice President Biden met privately with those of us working behind the scenes, and he sat down with us and looked us in the eye, and he said, you companies can do what we government cannot and will never do. You have to change the world on this issue. We are committed to change the world for LGBTI inclusion around the world.
How many companies have signed on to that now?
270. Our goal is to get many, many more, and then to work around the world. We're bigger than a lot of countries, so tremendous power.
After talking to Justin, we still had questions. So we sat down with a former top executive at one of the largest ad agencies in the world, Deutsch.
So I was chief creative officer at Deutsch. I was there for 8 years. And before that, I was 12 years at TBWA Chiat, which is the other probably biggest agency on the West Coast.
What does diversity, equity, inclusion look like at a major ad agency?
Diversity is conformity. Equity is unfairness. And inclusion means exclusion. Every ad is about advancing wokeness of some kind. We used to sit around and say, what does our agency stand for? What does this brand stand for? We're not asking that question anymore. We stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is wokeism, just packaged up for corporations.
Are they intentionally sexualizing our children and stealing their innocence?
I think they're trying to introduce the radical gender theory, radical gender ideology to your child. They're using commercials and merchandise and what they're selling to get your kid to believe that. That is how advertising works. Over time, it's building equity, brand equity in your mind. Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies have decided that they're going to indoctrinate your children with radical gender ideology, and that's 100% what they're going to do, and they don't even question it, and you should just expect that.
Just seems like there's no moral construct at all or end to this. No boundaries to message sexuality to kids, to the gender ideology.
If we don't speak up, it's over real fast from here. I don't think it's going to take long now.
So as long as they can protect their own kids from this insanity, they're perfectly okay with pushing it on unsuspecting children whose parents maybe aren't present.
I think that's right. I think they feel at this point the incentives are greater to do that.
What do you think parents out there should do to prevent this from hurting their kids?
Basically, the thing I would tell parents is there's an all-out assault for the brains of your children, and it's coming through every form of media you can imagine. And if you don't know that, you're naive, and it's going to transform your child's mind, and it won't take long, unless you guard their mind.
So what can you take away from this? Look at the examples set this year by conservative boycotts of Bud Light and Target.
Those companies have lost over $40 billion since the start of those boycotts. Use your money as a weapon to fight back in the war on children. Go the extra mile to buy from companies or small businesses who aren't pushing woke agendas. This is key to reclaiming America, and it's a far smaller price to pay than our ancestors had to pay. Know what your kids are doing online and protect them from the harmful content before they see it. Talk to your kids about how advertisers and major corporations are using the mere exposure effect to change their values and beliefs. There's power in knowing, and often you'll see that they resent being manipulated like this by powerful entities. Knowledge is power, and a generation that seeks truth is a generation that can save America.
Every parent needs to realize that what you've seen so far is only one part of the mere exposure effect that's been driving what can only be described as a far-left cultural revolution that's meant to destroy our country. But that's only part of the story. For the revolution to be successful, kids are the attack point. If this is a war on children, then what are the weapons being used? One of the most destructive weapons is social media. It's a weapon that communist dictators like Mao or Fidel Castro would have blushed over. With it, these powerful forces have the ability to censor what they don't want you to know and amplify what they want you to believe, while normalizing that social media alone will have the power to transform a generation. Have children died because of social media?
Absolutely.
Have they been trafficked off of social media?
100%.
Have they been sexually exploited off of social media?
Ongoing, yes.
How did social media influence your transition?
Well, honestly, I didn't even know that transition from female to male was an option until I was on social media and began being exposed to those type of communities. And it just really appealed to me as a scared, traumatized, girl going through puberty, precocious puberty, and I just clung to that idea.
What platform was the first platform you saw it on?
Instagram, but I think a lot of content trickled over from Tumblr and was reposted there.
Did the algorithm eventually start feeding you this stuff in your For You pages and things like that, where you would immediately see it, even if you didn't follow the accounts?
But I do think the algorithm was definitely geared toward and would recommend more accounts and stuff like that.
They were pushing the idea of transitioning.
Right, a lot of LGBT pages and stuff like that. It's definitely alluring, the idea of, a super accepting, loving community.
How accepting and loving have they been since you detransitioned?
Honestly, if anything, I feel like I've been hushed. I've been told I'm going to hurt trans people by speaking about my experience, and that I'm taking their rights away.
So they want to erase you. That's what would make them happy.
Essentially.
At what age did you get into porn?
So I got into porn at 18 years old and up until 23.
And how did you get into it?
So I came from an immigrant family that didn't have a lot of money. I wanted to have, financial freedom. So for me, it was very accessible.
How has social media affected your life, your peers, and your generation as a whole?
I'm scrolling on TikTok and I see these crazy people putting up the most awful things. And I see little kids with TikTok. What are they looking at?
I think that we have teenagers that grow up in society today and they feel
heavily influenced.
Now we're going to turn to the new warning from the Surgeon General this morning about growing concerns around social media and its impact on teens, and why he's calling on companies for rigorous health and safety standards.
It really is influencing our generation in more of a negative way than a positive way, because people feel like they have to compete with these other people.
I don't think a 10 or 11-year-old should have social media. A child is easily influenced.
Social media addiction is a growing concern for many parents. In fact, according to Pew Research, 97% of U.S. teenagers go online every single day.
Like, I'm young and I scroll through TikTok and I see all of these people who have jumped on the transgender bandwagon.
Our generation is seeking affirmation constantly, and that feels good. And like, I think a lot of people our age don't even care whether that's a real person or not.
Do you feel like you're fed explicit content, though, as a young person by these social media companies?
Oh, definitely. 100%.
I feel like it's allowing it easier to get to pornography.
You see something, you can't always like unsee it and stuff.
So they're finding this identity in social media, in pornography, from the LGBTQ religion.
There's a higher percentage of women that are addicted to pornography now. I know for myself, I've fallen victim to this type of thing.
Sometimes I'll see like a drag queen being so sexual and gross, and I'm like, what if the little kids who I babysit, who I see on their iPads, they're scrolling through TikTok, see that? People will get bullied if you don't have Instagram, if you don't have TikTok, if you don't have Snapchat, Twitter, whatever it may be.
How's it affecting your friends? Like, what have you seen from them in terms of even changing behavior?
I saw the kids who I grew up with turn into these transgenders, and I would have to call them Z, Zem, Zer, or I got in trouble.
But I've seen a steady year by year change in their patterns and their belief systems.
A friend of mine who clicked on this site kept looking and ended up starting addiction to pornography.
Kai Raychuk, the founder of Libs of TikTok, who for a very long time was anonymous. Nobody knew who you were. Let's talk about how you got here.
It started during COVID time. There were all these TikTok videos going very viral on Twitter, and it was mainly just COVID themed. I saw a whole nother side to TikTok that went beyond the vaccine songs and the dancing nurses. And that was the LGBTQ activism on there. TikTok specifically is designed to target young people. That's who their audience is.
When you got on TikTok, you downloaded it. How quickly were you serviced those videos on, trans content?
Right away, almost immediately. It's the first thing that pops up. They feed you content about pronouns and about transgenderism and drag shows and all that kind of stuff.
How do you see this when you watch these videos? Like, what is at the root of it?
Attention and mental illness.
And what is being done by our government?
I don't see anything being done. Having young kids on social media is really, really dangerous.
Does something need to be done, whether it's finding a way to segment and remove porn so that kids aren't exposed to it?
Definitely. I think porn should definitely be restricted to 18 plus. I don't think kids should be able to access porn.
Do you think that it's irresponsible or even unethical or wrong that social media companies invite children at age 12 and up to come onto their platforms knowing that there's pornography all over the platform and even predators that have access to kids?
Absolutely. I feel like it is the responsibility of all these social media platforms to put an age limit. Again, if it would be me, it would be 18 years old.
After that, we were curious. Would young people today give social media to their kids?
So would you give your children social media?
Absolutely not.
Not at all.
No.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Definitely not when they're younger. I don't think under 18.
I would not give it to any child under the age of 16.
I would not allow my children to have social media. I would not let my kids have social media as well. I think that social media is not good for kids.
Looking at this whole landscape from social media, the Chinese influence when it comes to TikTok and AI, do you feel like this is a war on children?
I know it's a war on children. And not just from a malicious foreign adversary, but from adults in this country who are visiting very corrupt values on children, sexualizing them, and doing so in some ways for profit. I think we can all see the evidence of our eyes and our ears.
Especially so on social media.
Especially on social media. and maybe becoming a mom awakened me to this danger, and sort of the scales fell from my own eyes. But like they said, you know, we're coming for your kids.
Yeah.
And they are. And they have.
What do you guys think is a bigger addiction problem and is hurting more people right now within your age group? Cigarettes or social media?
Social media.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Social media.
No hesitation.
No hesitation.
Social media.
Social media. Social media.
I think that China's laughing at us. I think that Russia's laughing at us. And I think that you can't have a strong country if you have confused citizens.
The honesty from these young people hit us hard. They seem to know that their generation's addicted and that social media is hurting their generation more than anything else. Their instinct already is to protect their young. But what are they protecting them from? Remember this. No matter what the powerful entities across the world try to tell you, what the media industrial complex tries to tell you, you are your child's greatest teacher. And they won't always like what you say, but keeping them safe from predators and exploitation is more important than them being upset for a little while. We have to prioritize our job as the greatest teachers and protectors. Embrace the outdoors, embrace family time, embrace connection and faith, embrace wonder, embrace curiosity with you as their guide. Reject the culture that seeks to destroy traditionalism, reject isolation, reject synthetic experiences, and choose real adventure.
This is a cultural revolution that operates both online and offline, in the open and in the shadows. You are the warriors charged with protecting kids from it.
If you still need convincing that this is a modern cultural color revolution, what's another sign that we're living through one? The remaking of parenting and education. But to understand where we're going, you have to understand where we are, where we were, and where we're going. Let's start with where we were. Sexualization in school used to be almost non-existent. Parents raised their kids instead of relying on screens. They took them out shooting targets, swimming, playing games, and exploring nature. Life was built around real experiences. And at school, we didn't have books with graphic illustrations of different kinks we could explore in the library. States didn't sue school districts in an attempt to force them to hide the gender identity or sexual orientation of students from their parents. We didn't have teachers forcing us to watch videos where we were exposed to pride videos featuring adults in intimate embrace. We weren't taught about blood play or bondage during sex ed. And we were taught to never keep secrets from our parents because predators could use that secrecy to groom you into abuse.
Is it concerning that we're normalizing keeping secrets from parents, or that you would be asked to do something? Does that make you feel that you're putting your students at risk?
Absolutely. I'm going to get emotional because I've been in that position as a child where really awful things happened to me. And, that individual wanted me to keep it a secret. I thankfully, from a young age have always stood firm in what's good and right and true. And I immediately, the second my mom picked me up from school, told her what happened, and she took it to the police. It was so scary for me. I was put in a police car and we went to his house, and I was so scared he was going to see me, but they let me know, he can't see you. We have bright lights on him. We just need you to tell us, was this him? And I said yes. And it turns out that he was abusing his kids. And my mom and grandma told me that I was the little girl's angel because that abuse was finally, taken out of her home because I didn't keep a secret from my mom. And if I had, we can imagine, how that would have played out. That abuse would have continued. I try to look at everything happens for a reason. And we have the choice to handle it in truth.
Comprehensive Sexual Education, or CSE, is the name of the sex ed most kids are getting today in public schools. But where does CSE originate? A woman named Mary Calderon, who believed that children are born sexual beings and that kids of all ages needed to learn about sex.
Like CSE is this like very broad umbrella kind of education and term to what to smuggle or sneak in all of the priorities of progressivism. So, you know, gender spectrums, transgenderism, abortion. So where does sex ed come from? Where does the kooky obsession with pushing porn on kids? We might go back to Alfred Kinsey, who in the late 1930s and early 1940s starts to parrot this belief about the sexuality of children. But the first director of the World Health Organization was named G. Brock Chisholm. And in 1945, G. Brock Chisholm goes to DC and gives 3 lectures on sex ed. And he says, quote, "We have to eradicate the concept of right and wrong." Well, one of the senior chief administrators at the World Health Organization at the time was named Frank Calderone, was going around the country bringing the Las Vegas burlesque and putting on sexual titillating public performances for people in the 1940s. Frank Calderone was married to Mary Calderone, who left Planned Parenthood as Planned Parenthood's medical director in 1964 to found the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States, SIECUS, which today is the major primary group at the helm of creating, promulgating, and raising up the next generation of teachers to integrate comprehensive sexuality education into America's public schools. Founding members of SIECUS had said that, that children were sexual from birth and that we had to affirm the strong sexuality of the newborn. The seed money to found SIECUS came from Hugh Hefner and Penthouse. The history behind this is far darker than most Americans understand.
Mary's dead now, but her work is very much alive in SIECUS, and it's influencing sex education in America more than anything else. SIECUS advocates now for sex change surgeries. SIECUS also partnered with a group called B-Vibe that sells bondage accessories and bondage teddy bears that kids might be drawn to.
What about the books in school? Readers are leaders, right? If you've engaged in the subject of books online, then there's a good chance you've seen comments like these. People like you have been bold enough to say, this doesn't belong in our schools. This is what you don't want kids to see. Is that correct?
Exactly.
And why is that? Why do you think this is inappropriate for children?
That is grooming, but it's also a form of mental rape.
You don't think that this is empowering or inclusive in any way when they talk about eating their own bodily fluids from sexual functions? That's not something that you think is empowering or inclusive for our children?
You know, I'm filled with righteous indignation. We have people in this country, they will go to any extent to push their level of normalcy, which is really abnormal. It's abnormal to put that level of content in front of a child in the name of making sure that a gay boy or lesbian girl can feel good at school. What educational benefit will a child learn from even thinking about the idea of ingesting their own body fluid?
These are celebrated books by the largest association for librarians in America. So parents need to understand that. So if you've ever heard this idea that there's just no pornographic books in our schools, I think we proved that wrong today.
And we're not into banning textbooks. We want to ban filth.
I had a really hard experience with these books that I was reading from freshman year to sophomore year, and even in 8th grade. There was books about masturbation and books about rape. And I'm a teenage girl and I'm reading this, and it's horrifying. It made me uncomfortable.
We want to ban pornography, and we want to expose children to wholesome literature.
We're each busting a load into this bottle. If you don't come, you have to drink it. Ha ha ha. Give me that. I'll show you how to do it. It comes with illustrations. This one is called Flamer, okay? Every one of these books can be found that we're showing today in a school library in America. And again, this is depicting children. This is supposed to be kids. People in the Democratic Party who say there are no pornographic books in our schools. What would you tell them?
I would say that they have reprobate minds and that their conscience has been seared with a hot iron.
I think in many ways the adults had to become desensitized first to be willing to subject children to this type of content. What happened to society where we've all been groomed to now think that there's some sort of subjective interpretation of a blowjob or anal sex tutorial showing that to minor children?
Oftentimes we hear about mama bears speaking up at school boards and addressing these issues. I'm trying to call forth the papa bears, men. And so I'm reminding men in America to stand up, square your shoulders, use the authority that God gave you, because men are called to be providers and protectors. But today, our men in the culture, our pastors in the culture are not engaging the intruders. The enemy has not crept around the back door. We have brought in the enemy through the front door, and we're giving him the red carpet to push his agenda.
I don't know that there's a more important call than that right now, that men need to stand up, because we've been involved in this fight and I've seen so many moms stand up, but dads seem to be slinking in the background.
And I'm asking for men in the culture to stand on their post and to address these issues, because we are almost at the point of no return.
After investigating these books, we had to ask, are teachers okay with this? To find out, we looked into the views of the teachers' unions. The National Educators Association is the largest teachers' union in America, and we quickly found that this year they put genderqueer on their summer reading list. And we found these recent panels at their annual conference. They include panels on critical race theory, so-called pedagogies of change, modeling climate change action, using education as a lever for environmental justice, decolonizing, recruiting allies, how to establish safe spaces, how to counter the, quote, right-wing echo chamber, how to bring social justice into curriculum, reparations, gender theory, pronouns, encouraging student activism to achieve equity and justice. They also went on to have panels on transformative social change and using social emotional learning to bring about the transformative change that they desire. Social emotional learning programs are in just about every school now. And the warm fuzzy name makes a lot of people feel good. But what is it?
Well, social emotional learning is a mental health and anti-bullying program that was originally brought into schools to teach kids how to manage their emotions and how to build healthy relationship with others. Unfortunately, now that has been completely changed. In 2020, the SEL standard bearer, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, changed the definition of SEL and its 5 core competencies to be a thing called transformative SEL, which is a completely different way of teaching SEL in that it does it through a racial and equity lens.
What exactly does that mean?
Right. So they think the original way that social emotional learning was taught was racist itself. They said that it made children of color had to conform to the norms and standards of this white supremacist culture, and therefore it needed a whole redo. And what they're doing now is they're taking subjects that are usually taught in SEL, like empathy and perspective taking. And they're saying that in order to be empathetic, you have to understand that the whole systems of America, all the institutions have been set up to purposely oppress people of color and other oppressed groups. They're saying now that you have to understand that in order to be empathetic, you have to show compassion, means you have to do something. So that means you have to become a social justice activist for these racial and gender causes, and then work to tear down the systems of America to make them more equitable for those oppressed groups.
Social emotional learning has been the biggest weapon in this war on kids.
They spend millions pushing SEL into schools, which is supposed to, in theory, make children more socially aware and able to have more positive interpersonal skill sets and connections. Yet we're seeing a lot more violence in classrooms. Where's the disconnect there? Why is this happening?
Well, you said that they were supposed to be more socially aware and more connected. In that sense, this is true. They're socially aware of things like microaggressions, like reparations. So they're more socially aware. They're more socially aware that people can have infinite genders. They're more socially aware. They are more connected. They're more connected to men going to women's bathroom. They're more connected to them.
We're seeing objective reality play out where there is more violence and teachers' hands are behind their back to stop it because of these restorative justice practices.
So when the restorative justice came in, it basically said, depending on your skin color, you can't be punished this way because it would be not culturally responsive. So now if the child gets picked on to get bullied, they have to sit with the other child and understand why they acted out. The danger to that is that once it leaves public school, you see it now in a lot of cities like San Francisco where they don't arrest anyone for like shoplifting.
And we're seeing, victims of horrific sex crimes have to sit face to face across from their abuser and negotiate, what that restoration process looks like.
All these virtues are being taught through either the lens of a critical race theorist or a transgender cult recruiter. And then when they get older, they don't follow laws because they've been taught in schools that what they do is not their fault. And it's the same reason when a child sees a man or girl sees a man in the bathroom locker room, they have to go through that struggle session. They have to get counseling to understand better, be more socially connected, be more socially aware. And so that's the danger of social emotional learning, to understand language contamination, understand to ask the question through whose lens is this being taught through. And if I tell you something and I tell you this is from a mass murderer, you're going to take that advice very differently than if I told you, oh, it's from a trusted mentor.
At this point, you might be thinking that this sounds closer to communism than the school you remember going to. And while not all teachers are communists, consider this. In Colorado, the teachers union representing 40,000 teachers voted this year to disavow capitalism entirely. In a statement that read,
"The CEA believes that capitalism inherently exploits children, public schools, land, labor, and resources. Capitalism is in opposition to fully addressing systemic racism, the school-to-prison pipeline, climate change, patriarchy, gender and LGBTQ disparities, education inequality, and income inequality."
In Oregon, a high school teacher at Churchill High School recently asked his students to write stories about their sexual fantasies. The California Teachers Association Conference had a presentation on how to introduce unlimited genders and transgenderism to toddlers, while yet another English teacher in Pennsylvania showed his students penises and videos of ejaculation, and another had kids in her class read a book we discussed with John Amachuwu called "This Book is Gay."
Stories like these seem to happen on such a regular basis that the shock factor almost begins to fade away. And all of this is happening as Democrats and the Biden administration create hundreds of millions in funding for something called, quote, community schools. Those are schools that provide healthcare in addition to the regular curriculum. Like social emotional learning, that might sound nice at first glance, but it really means that your child can receive sexually oriented care or counseling that you aren't told about. And then we have teachers going on national TV to say that parents don't have rights once they send their kids to public school.
But allowing movies such as this assist teachers in opening a door for conversations that have no place in our classrooms.
That just shows me that she's ignorant and has not come and volunteered at all. Because these conversations, these doors, they're open. These students have one-to-one devices. The amount of things that they're able to pull up that we have to shut down, these conversations, these doors that she's talking about, that's telling me I'm stripping her rights as a parent, those rights are gone when your child's in the public school system.
Activist teachers like this used to pretend that CRT didn't exist in schools, but now they're the first to tell you how important DEI and CRT are in education.
This is why when we're talking about, let's say, critical race theory in school, people go, they're not teaching critical race theory. It's actually much worse. When a child walks into a K through 12 today, they're not learning about critical race theory. They're learning how to behave and act and think and make decisions like a critical race theorist. And that means that America is oppressive, America is racist, your skin color determines your success, and so on and so forth.
That's why we should call them state schools. These are government-run schools.
Yes.
These are not public schools.
Right.
They're run by the government, who is ruled by an authoritarian left-wing party.
That's right. And so that's why when you walk into a public school today, it's a discipleship. It's not even a academic brainwashing. It's an emotional brainwashing. So it's truly a discipleship. And that's why these kids, they behave like missionaries because they're trained like one. And that's so whatever their social contagion they want the child to regurgitate, that's their mission. And so anything, whether it be climate changeism, whether it be gun control, abortion, anything, whether you have one opinion on this or not, they're teaching children in schools only one way. And that's how they're that's that critical consciousness that underpins a lot of the critical race theory. And transgenderism is just one of the ways. It's not a separate thing. It's just one branch, and it's an effective branch because it sexualizes kids, and obviously it destroys them, and that creates very useful angry soldiers.
So we wondered, do DEI or CRT make John Amanchuwu feel included as a black man in America? What does it mean to you as a black man, as a black father? Do you feel protected or included by knowing that there's a DEI officer at every school?
No, I don't. It doesn't benefit blacks through DEI. In North Carolina, in particular, when you consider Wake County, we've had a DEI office since 2013, and they have spent nearly $8.7 million on that office. And where are the measurable outcomes? You can't find any.
But what about the good teachers? There has to be some good teachers left, right? Right. But to find the schools and teachers who aren't embracing this woke revolution, you have to be involved and not be afraid to ruffle a few feathers by asking questions. You're a teacher who refused the transgender ideology at your school, and in return you were fired, and the school refused to accommodate your religious beliefs. How did that make you feel?
It felt surreal, and it still does, honestly. You could have never told me that I would spend 7 years going to college to become a teacher, live out my dream, impacting and influencing, the next generations, only to 6 years into my career be let go of because according to my school district, they could not accommodate my religious beliefs. So that's where it gets really interesting, and because it started with, as you mentioned, the transgender policies that were placed on me. These policies they presented me really essentially are wrapped around lying. So lying to students first and foremost, because they've asked me to call children by whatever they want to be called by, whatever gender, pronoun it is, I have to go along with that. And so if you really think about that, right, that is lying to a child because they're confused. And as adults, we're supposed to step in and guide them, on the path of success and prosperity and hope and positivity, and to go along with the lies that they're experiencing, that would not be, in my eyes, doing my job. And so it was so bizarre for the district to say, no, you have to, to keep your job, you have to go along with it.
So to be very clear, the policy was, if you have a student and they say that they go by Z-Zim or clown self, which is a real pronoun that some people use, you had to call them that.
Correct. And it gets worse than that too. When they presented that policy to me that I had to, they said, refer and respect students' gender preference or pronouns. That was in writing. And they then said vocally, you also need to withhold that from parents. And I looked the superintendent, assistant superintendent, like dead in the eye. And I said, are you asking me to lie to parents? And he said, yes.
The problem with cultural revolutions is that they build underground, almost invisibly for many years, until they happen seemingly all at once, in such a dizzying pace that it'll make your head spin. And while they're all different, every destructive cultural revolution has a few things in common. One is separating parents from their children. This even happened to my family in Cuba, where they survived a communist revolution. Kids in state schools were reported for reporting on their family members. Not dissimilar from how some were asked to report on their families during COVID if they broke COVID guidelines. And if you think you're automatically safe in private schools, think again. So if a parent says, I want to get away from this craziness in the public schools, they send their kid to private school, their kid is safe now, correct?
Unfortunately, no. I think it used to be that simple, but today, unfortunately, it's not. And so most private schools are under the umbrella of the NAIS, which stands for the National Association of Independent Schools. Just because you send a child to private school, it doesn't mean that they're automatically safe at all. So there's really two reasons for that. Number one, the NAIS, they have these decrees that they come down and say, you have to follow these. Now, does every private school follow it to the T? No, but a lot of private schools do.
NAIS is an organization thousands of private schools in America associate with.
And it's at the forefront of pushing this far left ideology. They even make recommendations that they stop using terms like boys and girls in favor of gender-neutral terms like students.
And at their annual People of Color conference, they had panels called White Boys Behaving Badly and another panel called No More White Tears.
Suffice to say that if your child is in a private school, ask that school about their association with NAIS.
Besides the NAIS, they're still largely using the same pool of teachers. So just because a teacher goes to a private school, they're still being trained under the same colleges that indoctrinate the teachers. Parents are trying to find a path of least resistance. What's the least I can do to get my children an education? This movement of separating children, of creating a revolution is everywhere. It's in cereal boxes, is on YouTube Shorts and YouTube Kids and Instagram stories and private schools and public schools and in Barnes and Nobles and everywhere. And so you can't, as a parent, ever say my child is good, because you need to have your hands in everything that they do.
The key to regime change and revolutions is to separate children from their parents. Bad actors are working to do this now through various means. One of those is gender ideology.
Your daughter was secretly transitioned at school.
My father passed away and unexpectedly, and then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So my daughter was in 5th grade at the time and was distraught over some of our family dynamics. Reached out to a guidance counselor and told her that she thought she was a boy. That guidance counselor immediately walked her after that meeting back to class and asked her if she wanted to be called her boy name and boy pronouns at school, and went ahead with that transition without me knowing. There's a policy in place right now that if your child identifies as a transgender and they just have to say that they're not ready to tell their family, that the school can transition them without your knowledge. This policy has to do with children as young as 5 all the way through high school.
A 5-year-old can be transitioned at school without parents ever being notified in the state of California.
Yep, all the child has to say is that they aren't ready for their family to know. And it's all in the name of the child's right to privacy.
Well, if they're able to consent to something as serious as changing their sex without their parents knowing, wouldn't the next natural step be people saying, oh, they can consent to sex with adults then?
To me, that sounds crazy, but also what's going on when it originally happened, I felt was crazy. And that's why I worked my way up within the district saying, how could you allow this with my child? When summer hit and she was removed from that environment, and she wasn't around that counselor and that school, she immediately went back to wanting to be a girl. As she came to me after a couple months and said, Mom, what happened to me at school was just so wrong. I just feel like it was really fast and I really didn't understand what being trans really meant.
This agenda has been more successful than some realize. The CDC's most recent report on youth found that a record 25% of high school students identify as something other than straight. That's an over 600% increase from the 2.8% of baby boomers who identify as LGBTQ. Pro-mutilation activists have said this is because of increased acceptance, but we found that this is a number not replicated anywhere else in the world. Something else is happening. And that something else is a social contagion. A social contagion is the spread of emotions or behaviors from one individual to another, sometimes without awareness. Social contagion processes become problematic when they lead to spades of self-injurious behaviors.
That sounds an awful lot like what's happening when TikTok feeds you videos about transgender ideology and you start to question your own gender.
The attack on identity becomes even clearer when you see a mom describe how they knew their kid was trans based on their green vegetable eating habits.
The pattern of everything that he had experienced as a child, including eating green vegetables because that boosts testosterone, were just methods of his body trying to become who he was meant to be.
You see, successful countries, a lot like successful people, have a track record of certain traits, like strength, resilience, outside-the-box thinking, and confidence. One key ingredient of confidence is identity, knowing who you are. If you want to shake the confidence of a person or a country, you must create an identity crisis.
It might seem to many like this ideology with pronouns, as crazy as clown, and clown self sprang up overnight, but in reality, the groundwork was laid many years before by John Money and Alfred Kinsey. Money tried his theories first on twin boys, who he experimented on. One brother was mutilated and raised as a girl, but he never felt like one. Despite pretending this was a success, both brothers ended up committing suicide. At this point, I doubt it'll shock you to find out that Hugh Hefner and Playboy were key parts of Kinsey's plan to sexualize our country.
If Kinsey is the bridge and his science is the bridge to the law to change the laws, well, then Hugh Hefner was the bridge from Kinsey to culture. Alfred Kinsey actually met Hugh Hefner when he was in college. And Hugh Hefner was a virgin at the time. And he revolutionizes Hugh Hefner into the playboy that he would become. Hugh Hefner would say things like fornicate early, fornicate often, and fornicate everywhere. So what's the motto of Playboy? Bunny.
Yeah.
And what do bunnies do? They hump. And what is Hugh Hefner's bunny wearing? A bow tie. Every photo of Alfred Kinsey, he's wearing a tweed suit and a bow tie. And by the way, Kinsey built his public appearance with this lie that he was a happily married man, a heterosexual, and faithful to his wife. His biographer would later admit that Kinsey was a sadomasochist, homosexual, sexual deviant pedophile. When we begin to understand the history behind this agenda, which wasn't just to disciple children through the public school system, it was to actually change laws all around America that were passed with the explicit intention of protecting children, family, and marriages. The goal was to actually work through the American Law Institute and other revolutionary groups to bring in this new social science. How then are we going to get this kind of curriculum into the schools? Well, we have to pass laws, but they had to get this new social science into curriculum. But then we got to get the state boards of education to accept it, right? So you know what they did? They start sending sex experts to lobby and argue before state boards of education to accept this new radical sex ed as just the norm, healthy public health kind of curriculum we need. Penthouse footed the bill to send the sex experts to lobby before state boards of education to allow for this kind of comprehensive sexuality education. Yes, Penthouse and Playboy, of course. Some of Sassy early pamphlets in 1964 and 1965 never used the term person or child or human. They always used the term sexual being to refer to human beings because that's how they see us. One of the early board members of Sassy was named Wardell Pomeroy. Wardell Pomeroy was a very close friend of Kinsey. Some people actually think a lover. Guess who became the executive director of the Kinsey Institute? Wardell Pomeroy. In 1980, in an article called Attacking the Last Taboo, Wardell Pomeroy was described as part of the pro-incest lobby. And in this interview with Time magazine, he says, incest between children and adults can sometimes be beneficial, and it need not be a sign of mental illness. That was said by the executive director of the Kinsey Institute and one of the first board members. The primary problem with Kinsey was that his entire social science and science on sex was based off of lies. So his book, published in 1948, was called Sexuality and the Human Male. Then in 1958, he publishes Sexuality and the Human Female, which is the same year that Playboy is launched by Hugh Hefner. And he claims that most American men, about 90% of American men, are not faithful to their wives. Most of them have homosexual tendencies and engage in homosexual sex. You read his numbers and his predictions in his books, and you're like, where does this come from? Well, what he had done is he had gone into the prisons and he had interviewed rapists and pedophiles serving life sentences, guys. And so he went into the prisons and he actually interviewed pedophiles. And so he asked them about their sexual experiences with children, guys. That's what he does. And so table 34, this is the kind of the infamous table in his book, Sexuality and the Human Male. It documents the rape of children as young as about 18 months old and as old as about 10 or 11. With how many orgasms the children had over a 24-hour period, timed with a stopwatch. And Kinsey believed that even if these children were writhing, screaming, and moaning in pain, that was just proof that they were taking pleasure from this sexual act being done on them.
Is there an agenda to normalize pedophilic behavior?
And so when you look at Kinsey, when you look at his obsession with incest and with the sexuality of children, it's hard to not believe that the agenda was not to normalize eventually any form of sexual behavior.
Queer theory is also why you might see activists using terms woman with a Y or woman with an X. Those aren't typos. Those are to remove the word men from women. Another sliver of reality they seek to destroy. Couple the vile beliefs of John Money, Alfred Kinsey, and queer theory with TikTok and our social contagion of identity confusion among youth is what you get. In some pockets of the country, this social contagion is even clearer, like California's Davis Joint Unified School District, where students self-identify as transgender 4.3 times the national average.
Would you guys say that people who are identifying as all these things are being treated better?
Well, they're getting affirmed by culture, and culture is the big elephant in the room, because it's like everything is affected by culture. And so if culture affirms it, that means you're universally accepted.
What happens is they come from these environments that they don't feel valued, they don't feel loved. So what happens is they get this admiration from people around them, and these people around them encourage them to continue doing what they do, and then they get too deep and they value the affection and the attention that they get because they so want it, but they have never gotten it before.
Absolutely. That's why they gave Mr. Thomas, William Thomas, the trophy rather than Riley Gaines. Yeah, that's one of the best examples he could use. Exactly.
Well, at this private school, the teachers would favor these kids who were going through this, and they would give them extra attention. After time, after class, more attention towards them. They're just worshiping these kids, and that makes them feel good, and that makes them want to continue to do it and make it worse, put it out there more, and indoctrinate other people, their friends, their family, into this ideology.
California's 2020 to 2021 main report of the California Healthy Kids Survey also found that kids who identify as non-binary self-report far more mental illness than other kids do, including chronic depression and suicidal ideation.
If you think kids can't be influenced by a litany of algorithms on TikTok, then you're not familiar with the famous psychological experiment conducted by a man named Robert Kleck. He was a psychologist at Dartmouth University. In the experiment, they put a fake scar on people's faces who were going into a room with other people.
But right before they went in to mingle with the crowd, the makeup artist made what the subject thought was a touch-up to make the scar more visible. But in reality, they removed it before they entered the room. At the end, they were asked if they were discriminated against over their scar. Nearly all of them reported that they were discriminated against. They were confident that their scar was being stared at or that people made rude comments. They felt that way after only one impression, seeing the scar on their face via a small pocket mirror. Now imagine how sure a teen feels about their identity confusion if they're fed a steady stream of videos on the TikTok algorithm about transitioning.
At least the social contagions when we were kids didn't hurt you long term. Maybe you had a weird haircut, a piercing, or a very unique style, but you outgrew it.
You can't outgrow a double mastectomy though.
If you watch the news, you've probably heard politicians and pundits saying things like this.
Transgender children are not having surgeries. That's really important to say.
In his tweet, he talked about stopping surgeries for people under 18, which is not a thing. That is not a thing that happens.
There is misinformation presented that somehow that we're doing surgery on minors or even children, and that simply is not true.
So Layla Jane, how old were you when they gave you a double mastectomy?
It was a month after my 13th birthday.
How long was the process before that with the doctors to prepare you for this?
I initially started seeing doctors for my gender dysphoria when I was 12. So it was within that time frame, within a year.
What age were you when they put you on puberty blockers?
I was 12 years old.
12 years old, doctors gave you a drug called Lupron. This drug has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders, pedophiles in prison, but they prescribed it to you to stop your hormones. Is that correct?
Correct. At 12 years old.
Do you believe that you were given informed consent about the risks of puberty blockers?
I don't think so. I think, it was spoken of very lightly. I mean, they really did say it's just a pause. There were some slight concerns about my bone development, but they just told me to take some vitamin D.
That's it. That's the only thing they were concerned about while giving you a chemical castration drug that they give to pedophiles that isn't actually designed or made to stop your puberty. It's not even approved for that. They're just playing, doctor. They're doing science experiments on little kids. At that age, we're still very much a kid, right?
Right. I mean, I was really naive. I didn't have an understanding of the world. I wasn't even in high school yet.
It'll never leave my mind how Layla looked when she walked in the room with us. She was a damaged young girl. Her anxiety was palpable. Before she ever said a word, my heart sank as I wondered how a doctor could ever operate on such a vulnerable child. They took an oath to do no harm. How? And then it hit me. We have a daughter older than Layla was when the doctors did this to her.
The other side says to listen to trans people. Well, Layla did identify as trans. And when you were experiencing the gender dysphoric feelings, was there any inquiry as to what that root cause might be? Or was there just, seemingly this shift laser focused on the gender transition?
Definitely. There was definitely a shift. And they really kind of ignored my comorbid mental health issues like anxiety and whatnot. I remember one of my doctors said that if I transition, my anxiety and my mental health would get better.
Did the doctors warn you at all about potential side effects from a double mastectomy? Like seriously warn you about the long-term consequences of a dangerous surgery like that?
Really, the main thing was they told me, and this is what the words they used, they told me I wouldn't be able to chest feed. I might have some slight cosmetic, they called it dog ears, is like the term. I think it's like when the scars sag. But that's really all they warned me about. Like when I was in the healing phase, the first year or so, the nerves kept reconnecting over my scar tissue, and it was just excruciating.
And were any of those regressive gender stereotypes used as a, factor of, oh, well, you might like this color or this clothing, so therefore you should, transition?
I was a bit tomboyish as a kid. Like I used to love Hot Wheels and I used to follow my dad around the garage and stuff like that. I wasn't big on dolls, and I definitely was like, you know what? Makes sense. I kind of latched onto that as more proof that I was trans.
Can you speak a little bit to your experience and how that pressure affected your body image, your self-perception, and your idea of what it means to be a woman?
Yeah, I mean, around the time I fell into all this, like now it's like in to be like curvy and whatnot, but back then it was the thigh gap, and I didn't have that build, and
Were there some, like body issues as far as like eating disorders or anything that played a role that maybe then turned into that more gender dysphoric symptomology?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely had some issues with, my relationship with food and my body and whatnot that just went completely unresolved. And they got really bad after I had top surgery, and I need something else, I guess, for my brain to focus all the negative energy on myself.
Is there a difference between somebody who's anorexic or bulimic going to a doctor and requesting liposuction, and a child going to a doctor and requesting to have their healthy body parts chopped off?
Lately I'm having a harder time seeing the difference, especially if they would have gave me liposuction, I would have done it.
That's very important you said that. Admitting that you would have gotten liposuction if they would have allowed it, that tells us that you couldn't have possibly consented to anything else. Do you feel like you had informed consent?
No, I mean, even the way they watered down their wording and called it top surgery instead of a double mastectomy. And there's just a lot of information that I didn't know about, like my own anatomy. Because mind you, I was so young, I hadn't taken a sex ed class. I hadn't even seen like diagrams. I think the biggest thing that they left out that I still deal with sometimes is the nerve damage on my scars and my chest. They told me I might lose sensation, but I was expecting numbness. I wasn't expecting like the electrifying jolts and just itchy sensation that I can't scratch.
What were some of the effects of testosterone in your female body?
Increased permanent body hair. My voice is deepened. I don't know if you can see it under the lighting, but I have a slight Adam's apple.
Is it your hope that those things will go away?
I've just kind of accepted that some of these things I have to live with. You know, this Adam's apple is always going to be here unless I get it shaved down surgically. You know, I have increased bodily hair and a little bit of facial hair that continues to grow. I was under the impression that would stop if I stopped taking testosterone, and it didn't.
That's another thing they didn't inform you about.
Correct.
Who paid for all of these medical interventions? Was it insurance? Were there private groups? Or
It was covered by Kaiser.
everything?
Yeah.
Now, does Kaiser cover your aftercare now that you've detransitioned?
No, not really.
Layla's case is heartbreaking, not only because of what she was put through, but because she's not an anomaly. She's a drop of rain in a storm that's coming. A Reddit group called Detrans has grown to nearly 50,000 members this year. Some critics say, I thought you believed in parental rights, but parental rights don't allow you to abuse your child by giving them a sex change any more than it allows you to legally turn them into a heroin addict. In the US, one study found that 70% of pediatric patients are diagnosed with autism, ADHD, or some other mental health problem prior to being diagnosed with gender dysphoria.
Kids are not the only people being abused in this scheme. Parents in the oath to do no harm are being abused as well.
When I heard a pediatric doctor from Stanford using the phrase daughter with a penis during a TED Talk, I knew we had entered dangerous new territory.
Right when Avery was handed to her mom sensed a special bond, a mother's intuition that Avery was different. And her parents, as soon as Avery was a preschooler, knew that as a daughter with a penis, they needed to advocate for her rights.
The trust bond where kids believe doctors and do as they say is a no-brainer when you consider the Milgram experiments from the 1960s. In the 60s, a social psychologist named Stanley Milgram conducted several studies at Yale on obedience and authority. Milgram wanted to know why people do evil things. In his book, Obedience to Authority, Stanley mused that most evil acts are committed by normal people who blindly obey authority.
Basically, he believed that most people would stray from basic morality if someone in authority told them to. And he was right. In the experiments, Stanley had an authority figure tell unknowing participants to deliver electric shocks of increasing intensity to what they believed to be a real patient, and deliver the shocks all the way up to max intensity even when the fake patient begged them to stop, asked for mercy, and even when they told them that they had a heart condition. So when a doctor tells a confused child that they are in fact born in the wrong body by immediately affirming gender dysphoria, they are in effect the supervisor telling the child to turn the electric shocks all the way up. What are some of the more egregious programs that our taxpayer dollars are funding that harm children?
I think it's mainly through the schools. You know, my concern is really about kids who aren't ready to make this decision. You know, people say, "Oh, you're a libertarian. What are you getting involved with this, the bedroom and all that?" And I was like, you know, I don't care what adults do in the bedroom, but I do care, you know, if they have to tell my children about it. Why are they involved with this? Has to be something they need to tell the children in elementary school. They've got to tell them at the library. They've got to tell them in all these public venues. You know, 10 years ago, do you think anybody, I don't remember any conservatives complaining about a drag show for adults. You know, there are adult places that you can go around town. Bars have ages. We've always had sort of this idea of adults can make decisions, and we may not approve of other people's decisions, but for the most part, we're like, live and let live, leave people alone. But with kids, there is an obligation. I mean, for example, if a child is being abused at home, even by the parents, physically or otherwise, the state has an obligation to go in and rescue that child. I think it's the same here, but it's the opposite. The government's funding the schools, and then the schools are saying, oh, we're not going to tell the parents. We're going to change the kids' clothes, call them by another name, encourage counselors. I mean, ultimately, we're going to talk about, are they going to give, the counselors going to give them medication there at school without their parents' permission? I mean, I think we're leading towards an absurd and horrific time. And there already are these cases, you know, parents taking their kids to California. You know, your 13-year-old's going to have irreversible surgery and the father doesn't want it. And they're calling the father somehow a hater, and the father has no rights over the child now. I mean, this is leading to a time in which there's going to be war between families, war in our culture. You know, this is a bad time, and I never thought we'd get there in our lifetime. That this is where we've come.
Can you tell us the answer, since Dr. Rachel Levine, can a child consent to these transgender surgeries?
You know, it's a question that's been going on for a long time. What's the age of adulthood? When can children make decisions about their medical care? We always had, and it was pretty much decided. I mean, I've worked as an emergency room doctor. If kids came in even with a small laceration, we would begin cleaning it up, but we wouldn't sew it up, even a small little incision, until the mom or dad got there. In Oregon, your kid can transition at 13 and have parts of their body removed, but can't get a tattoo without their parents' permission. It's kind of sort of absurd. And it's sort of the opposite of what you hear from the media. From the media, you hear all these kids are being bullied and they're going to commit suicide because they're being bullied. I think it's the opposite. I think they're being encouraged, they're being affirmed. Everybody's saying, we're so proud of you. If you go, or someone advises you go to a gender dysphoria clinic, I guess they don't even call it dysphoria, gender affirming clinic, where they want to call it. When you get there, there's nobody giving you the other side of the story. The only people who work in these clinics are people who have either had the surgery themselves or are huge advocates for this. It's a one-sided process.
What can you do? Speak up. That's what every abuse survivor we've talked to has asked you to do. Conversations are going to be uncomfortable. You may lose a friend or a client, but speaking up is how this ends. Some may even ask you, why do you care? These aren't your kids. Let them do what they want. But this line of thinking ignores the reality that our kids are going to have to grow up alongside these issues, and sometimes inside a locker room with them.
We were forced to swim against biological male Leah Thomas, who is formerly Will Thomas, who swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania. Of course, then transitioning to the women's category his senior year, to where he dominated the women. First of all, we weren't forewarned we would be sharing a locker room. We had no idea. We're in this locker room, I'm changing, I had my back turned, silent. I turn around, a 6'4", 22-year-old man disrobing, fully intact with an exposing male genitalia. The only time we became aware that this was the arrangement was when we had to see it with our own eyes. So any man would have had full access to that bathroom, any coach, any parent, any pervert who wanted to would have had full reins to be in there, and bare minimum, we weren't even told about this. So they most certainly want to normalize this. They want to take away our rights to privacy.
Is it fair to refer to what happened to you with Leah Thomas exposing his penis to you and other female swimmers mental rape?
No, it most certainly is fair to say that. If a man would have walked into a woman's locker room, a DA is walking in there arresting this man, and he is getting charged with sexual harassment, voyeurism, indecent exposure, and I'm sure the list can go on of charges. But now it really is celebrated. It's encouraged. That next day of competition was the day that Thomas and I raced, and almost impossibly enough, it resulted in a tie. We get out, we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself and says, great job, but you guys tied, and we only have one trophy. We're gonna give Leah the trophy because Leah has to have it for pictures. That's when I was no longer willing to lie. And that's when I ultimately took this public stance and acknowledging how it's harmful to women, not just female athletes, to women. Leah Thomas was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year. That's how they honored Thomas for taking away our rights to our privacy, for taking away our scholarships, our spots on that podium, our dignity. This award was devalued to me. It was meaningless. I didn't want this award. They're encouraging men to go into women's locker rooms and for others to be complicit in the process.
Average people like us, we look at what happened and we go, Riley won. You know, no normal person is going, Leah won. I think what's really worse is the situation happening in the locker room, because this is sexual assault, and instead of treating it like sexual assault, we've got a group of people in our country who are running a large majority of our country who are actually more likely to charge someone like you with a hate crime for saying something about it than they are to go after the man who's exposing themselves. When they can't win this argument or get confronted with victims of their ideology, they often turn to something Marxist revolutionaries have always turned to: old-fashioned lying. That's why they try to claim these surgeries don't exist, despite mountains of evidence that they're happening at record rates. And it's why you'll hear people pretending that there's no competitive advantage for men or boys playing sports against actual women.
You don't believe that a biological male has a physical advantage in sports over a biological female?
Not as a definitive statement.
How many female members of the NBA do you see?
Well, I can say that, there's been this news article about men that think that they could beat Serena Williams in tennis, right? That they think that they could actually score a point on her. And it's just not the case. She is stronger than that.
What's your experience, Ben? Male, female?
Both Serena and Venus lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, which they're phenoms for women. My experience, my husband, he swam at University of Kentucky as well. In terms of accolades and in terms of national ranking, I was a much better swimmer than him. He could kick my butt any day of the week.
Oh, the knees, and that's it. How you feeling right now? I'm feeling excellent. That was sweet, huh? Did you like that? Every woman in this tournament better look out. I'm freaking coming.
So why are there no cases of females like you deciding that they're a man and coming to compete against men my size? Why isn't that happening?
This is only happening one way. Women don't want to go into men's restrooms. All of these stories, it's only contributing to the erasure of women. This is actually a point that I think is so important. In regards to that NCAA championship, we had another swimmer from Yale who was a female transitioning to male, finishes dead last every time. The only male swimmer that Isaac beat was a male swimmer with one arm. And it's because Isaac would have never and will never be able to compete against the men at that same level. This is the fastest meet in the world. And it goes back to the question of why isn't this happening the other way around? And it's because there's only something to gain from men being in women's facilities, bathrooms, prisons, sororities, locker rooms, sports. Peyton McNabb, the volleyball player from North Carolina who was spiked in the face by a male. Still to this day, she's partially paralyzed on her right side. She has vision impairment. She can't play college sports now. She has to have special accommodations at school for testing because she can't retain information like she could before the hit. So this is a legitimate concern. So back to the message that's being sent that I'm constantly reminded of, it's that we don't matter. It's that our safety doesn't matter. What matters to the NCAA, to the people leading this country, whether that's the state level, the federal level, all of these different sport governing bodies, what matters to them is the feelings of a male, not our feelings, not any of our success or sacrifices, as you mentioned. That doesn't matter. And that's the message that they're sending.
The mental rape of Riley Gaines and other girls like her is only possible because of silent accomplices who refuse to speak up about these issues.
So today, does a girl have a right to a space where for her to undress without men staring at her or without her having to look at male genitalia?
If it's up to the Biden administration, then no. This means men could join sororities. Men would have full access to bathrooms, changing areas, locker rooms on campuses. They could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. They could be housed in dorm rooms with women, and you can do nothing about it. Actually, if you were to say something about it, you're guilty of sexual harassment. They want to normalize this so bad, and you have to ask yourself the question of why. Why do they want to normalize this? Men in women's locker rooms undressing next to young girls? Yeah, we should have a right to privacy, but we don't as women anymore.
You might even be tempted to say, well, that's one example, but this isn't happening outside of college.
But it is. Girls now must worry at all ages about a man exposing his penis to them in a locker room, raping them in a bathroom, or they have to worry about being beaten by a man claiming to be a girl. You might still be tempted to think that you could hold strong and not give in if your child was affected by gender ideology or queer theory. But in California, they passed a law that would classify a parent not affirming their child's self-professed transgenderism as child abuse.
This law would also give custody preference to parents who are affirming the child is trans, while punishing those who refuse to affirm it. One man that would affect is Harrison, a dad whose son is called non-binary by his mother.
My son actually knows he's a boy. He'll tell you he's a boy if you ask him. If you say anything to the contrary, he'll actually get mad.
The media has reported that Sawyer's mom has borderline personality disorder. And there's also a major study that was done that showed that 53% of moms who have children that they're transitioning have borderline personality disorder. Does that seem like something that should be setting off red flags to people, that those types of numbers are showing up when it comes to mental illness associated with this?
Absolutely. It's horrifying, first of all. But secondly, I mean, to see that staggering of a number, 53%, and I believe it's of moms that have boys that are transitioning specifically. And to see that, it's pretty scary to think that that could be happening at such a big number. And I do think it has a big relevance to it.
But his mother is able to take him to these meetings or to these appointments in furtherance of having him be transgender.
Well, she takes him to a doctor that's okay with it. This doctor actually testified in our trial. And actually the court ordered after our trial that he has to continue to see that doctor.
And this judge was a member of the LGBTQ community. Is that correct?
That was part of her election process. It was like, that was her big thing. Yeah.
So, okay, so there's some bias there. Did she come up with this on her own as far as like, I want to raise these babies, as sometimes they call it? Or was this something that she saw stereotypical behavior and decided to associate that with a particular gender?
When he was really young, she actually would call him a boy on social media and everything. So it wasn't till about when I started getting custody of him that this happened. I just started seeing things on social media where she was calling him they and things like that. And then I found pictures of him in dresses and wearing makeup and just a lot of really scary stuff to see.
Did he ever talk with you about that experience? That, you know, was it his idea? Did he ever want to play dress up with you at your house, or was this something that happened exclusively at the mom's house?
So it happens exclusively at the mom's house. And when he's with me, he fully expresses he loves being a boy. He's just like a picture perfect little boy. He'll play in the mud. He likes to fight and wrestle and climb and play sports.
If he were to say, I want to play with the doll, or I like the color purple or pink, you know, how would you respond to that?
I would probably just give it no meaning.
In the Republican Party, state legislatures seem to be the primary group fighting back against this ideology. That's why we spoke to Representative William Lamberth in Tennessee, who championed a bill that banned sex changes for kids and voted to ban sexual adult performances like drag shows for kids.
Just yesterday, the Tennessee legislature faced a domestic terrorist attack where somebody sent a letter with white powder in it. I don't think there's any determination on what that was yet, but this is clearly being done to try to make you guys afraid. When you see these activists do this, and in this case we know from reporting that this is most likely a trans activist, it was sent in the name of somebody who was trans and they died. What do you think, and are they able to make you afraid?
Absolutely not. So here's the thing. We're going to fight for what's right in Tennessee. And these folks from all over the country that have obviously never visited our state, that have obviously never met a Tennessean, they don't really understand us, okay? We stand up for what's right. We stand up for what's going to make Tennessee better tomorrow than it is today. We are the volunteer state. We literally volunteer to go all over the world to help out other people, to fight battles for other states.
That goes back to Davy Crockett.
Absolutely. There'd be no Texas if there were not for Tennesseans. And so this is who we are. Tennesseans have got an awful lot of grit, and mailing some powder to an office in a cowardly act to try to intimidate somebody is both not going to work, and it's also kind of stupid, okay? Because think about this. There's a staff member in one of our members' offices who opened that envelope. She sees white powder and a threatening letter, and yeah, it scared her. She's a young lady who's pregnant with their first child, and all of a sudden she's got this white powder in front of her. The only thing that person did was terrorize an innocent state employee who's just doing her job.
May not even be a Republican. You know, like that's the thing is
Absolutely.
When they send these letters, you don't know if a Democrat or a Republican's opening them.
Yep.
Do the people who oppose these bills that would protect children from sterilization, chemical castration, or even these sexually explicit adult shows really understand the nature of what these procedures and experiences entail?
Well, unfortunately, some do. And they're still in favor of it. But many of the folks that we talked with, when they were really told, like, look, this is what this procedure is, this is what it does, these are the negative effects that are going to last a lifetime, they really heard from these young people that were so brave to come down here and just testify as to some of their most intimate and difficult decisions in their life that could have been made. When that happened, when that was exposed, it changed a lot of minds. And I hope it changes more.
Why do you think it is that the left is making this some sort of civil rights issue, as if it's akin to when Rosa Parks sat down and refused to get up from a bus?
It mixes different issues together. And that's insulting to those folks that fought and bled and died in our country for us to have civil liberties, so that nobody is judged based on their ethnicity, their religion, or their sex. And that sex is something you can't change. That's built up in our civil rights that protect men and women. And when you start blending that, it actually erodes those civil liberties. It doesn't protect them.
After a wave of Republican-led states passing laws to prevent more innocent people from being victimized, many Democrat-run states have pounced back with what one expert described as trans youth trafficking bills.
Late in 2022, California had a SB 107, and that was the first one. It's essentially trafficking. Very briefly, the bill basically says out-of-state children can cross over to California, and they will not reunite them with their parents if the parents do not agree to transgender procedures. That's puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone surgeries. That was the first one. And since then, there's been at least 5 or 6 states that have done copycat bills to SB 107. And so the transgender trafficking bill is an extension to all the secrets that are being kept in schools by school counselors and social workers, teachers. And so they've set the tone that parents are unsafe and abusive. Then they're expanding on that foundation that these transgender trafficking bills like SB 107 in California, like HF 146 in Minnesota, and in Washington State, there was a SB 5599. And those are copycat bills that does exactly that. It separates the children from the parents because parents are deemed unsafe and abusive.
So why would a state try to undermine the laws of another state, especially when that law is built to protect kids from sex change surgeries? To find out, we tried to interview a lawmaker from Colorado, Representative Brianna Titone, who identifies as transgender. In fact, Brianna is only the 8th trans state representative. Titone got a trans youth trafficking bill signed into law that makes Colorado a state where minors can go for sex change surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers if their home state rightfully bans those abusive medical experiments.
We were going to initially reach out to the first trans representative in American history, but they were unavailable, seeing as how they were recently arrested for child pornography charges in an absolutely horrific story.
But as the interview date grew closer with Brianna canceled after researching me.
I decided I had to give him a call.
Hello?
Hey, is this Brianna?
Yes. Who's this?
Hey, Brianna, this is Robbie Starbuck. I wanted to see if you had a second to talk.
Oh, no thanks. I'm not interested.
I guess I'm just confused because your interviews, you said that you want to talk to people who disagree on this. And, we want to just have a respectful discussion with you to see if I'm missing something. I'm totally open to, your...
The kind of stuff that you say on a daily basis all the time, there's no reaching you. There's no point. And I'm going to end the call. Thanks for calling. Bye-bye.
Do you think that little kids can consent to sex changes? Well, that's it. Brianna did not want to have a discussion, and that shouldn't be a surprise because everyone on this pro-child mutilation advocacy side, they avoid conversations at all costs because they know that they can't win the argument against people who are empowered with facts and statistics and the horror stories of what kids have been through who've gotten double mastectomies at ages like 13, okay? They don't want to speak to people like that. They want to speak to the people who are manipulatable. They want to speak to the people who are weaker. That's why they target children. They want to speak to people who are not resolute in their values because ultimately they know that's the only group that they can get on their side. That's why they run away from these conversations. So it shouldn't be a surprise to you that they're not interested in conversation. In fact, in the email before this, they said they didn't want to do the interview anymore because they don't want to go into the lion's den and stick their head in the mouth of a lion. It's kind of a compliment because I do kind of feel like that's what parents need to be right now. Lions who protect our pride, protect our children. That's the pride that should be on all our minds. It's the one that we need to protect.
An ongoing theme we noticed when we tried to learn more about the opinions and beliefs of people on the left who adhere to this ideology, we realized they don't want to talk. They declined interview after interview after interview. We were left with no other choice. We tried to call them.
It's really sad that you feel that way. We actually represent a lot of, detransitioners that also have a voice and should be heard. Do you not believe there's anything such as detransitioners? Have you heard of detransitioners that have had their genitals mutilated and are on? Oh my God! Have had surgeries and double mastectomies at 13 years old.
And as you're asking these questions, this is precisely why we're declining this opportunity.
Because we want to know if detransitioners can get help.
I hope you find exactly what you're looking for.
Why does this ideology not allow questions? Isn't that a sign of grooming when you can't ask a question?
I don't understand why you're continuing to ask me questions.
This war even reaches newborn babies now.
The Biden administration's CDC recently issued a guidance for men who identify as women to, quote, chest feed their babies. This comes after recent viral videos of men identifying as women forcing babies to suck on their nipples. Make no mistake, this is sexual abuse. The CDC's guidance doesn't warn once about the lack of nutrition, the potential for harm through ingestion of the drugs these men take, or the reality that this is a known sexual kink of at least some men who identify as women. This war on kids is institutionalized within our government. The Assistant Secretary of Health appointed by Joe Biden is a confused man named Rachel Levine. He says that sex changes for kids is healthcare that will literally prevent suicides. But I think Abigail might disagree.
It started at school. She was going through depression in middle school. It was in 8th grade when I went, talked to the principal, what happened. I took her to the hospital because on that day she took some pills, overdose. So it was allergy pills. So that's how everything started. Went to the doctor. She was fine, but they didn't release my daughter with me. They called CPS. Since that moment, I had CPS at my house, coming twice a week. When her grades was going down, that's when I went to the high school and talk about, her depression. And I was hoping to get help to give her more time for the test. Instead of that, what they did is send her to LGBTQ group. I didn't know anything about it. So my daughter started, to change. She looked pretty mad, upset, depressed. One day she talked to her sister that she thought that maybe she liked girls. But later on, she wants to change her name. Her name is Yaylee. She changed her name to Jay. A couple months later, she didn't like it. So then she changed it to Andrew. And then she's starting to talk about, she felt like she was in the wrong body. I'm here, you see a girl, but inside I'm a boy. And I go like, since when? I didn't know that she was going to these groups at school.
Nobody at the school told you.
No, they secretly sent her to these groups.
How was her mental health in the limited visits you had with her?
She was not able to sleep. After, going through all this, their depression is worse than what it was before. Why? Because now they are dealing with pain, with medication, going back and forward to the doctor. Surgery is not just one. They don't tell them that. I thought she was going to go into therapy first. That they will explain the positive, the negative, and, the side effects. If you want to help my daughter, help her inside out. What's in here? Why she's this depression? After the testosterone shot, she tried to suicide twice.
When CPS came to remove your daughter, will you walk us through that process?
They planned all this with the mother and this other kid from the high school. Oh my gosh, I was crying. And then what should I do? And I need to do something. My neighbor had cameras, so they were able to see. That car was there for 5 minutes waiting for my daughter to get out. That made me feel like my daughter was insured doing this plan. So all the time that they had my daughter, they sent it to a group home. I couldn't go visit after court. It was her new home now. After we went to court, we had a meeting there with LGBT, CPS, the people who work there, the group home, trying to convince me that what my daughter needs is going to the transition, and I have to respect her. And you have to refer to that, not to my daughter, you have to say my son. And I said, no, I can't do that. Who's my son? They said, well, if you don't do that, you'd rather have a dead daughter and not a live son? And I said, none of that is going to happen just because a name.
Why did they do that to parents? Because I've heard that from every kid who has detransitioned.
They want to manipulate the parents and see if they gave up. And they are very cruel with parents. They're not there to support the parents. One of them came to my house and I asked her to leave because she asked me that why it was so difficult for me to accept a boy instead of a girl. And I said, I don't think you have children. But it's easy. Just plan a funeral for your daughter and adopt your son. Oh, and the moment I asked her to leave my house, don't you ever come because you cannot tell me I'm going through this, she's going through this depression, trying to commit, and you're telling me to prepare her funeral? How cruel is that?
What they did, people should go to jail for life for what they did to your daughter.
And then September 4, she decided to kneel in front of a tree. I begged even at the funeral home that I want to see her for the last time. He said, there's note that you can't. And I said, well, just let me see one of her hands. When he asked me that, he went back where they had my daughter. And he said, let me check, let me see what I can do. He was an ex-Marine. And when he came inside, he looks different to me. And he said, can I? He got his seat and he asked me, I'm going to tell you I'm an ex-Marine. And I saw a lot of, I'm going to therapy because of that. But I never got to see something like that. So I will encourage you not to see her like that, because if you insist, and I cried and I said, can I see one of her hands, finger, something? And there's nothing that you can really see.
Well, I think from heaven, she can see how hard you fought for her. And you told the truth, always. And I think that's a gift that a lot of kids aren't getting right now. They don't have parents that care enough to tell the truth and to fight for them. And you fought very hard for her. You're a good mom.
Can I give you a hug? Thank you for being such a good mom. I'm so sorry what they did to you guys.
Thank you.
It breaks my heart.
What would you say to parents that don't understand the very serious result that can happen by not taking action to protect their children?
What I will say is not to trust the school, the principal, the school psychologist, because now they are working on this agenda. So I will ask the parents to get involved in school. Go inside and ask them what are they reading, because now it's not math, it's not science, it's not English. It's going to this ideology. This ideology is killing our kid.
Do you think more people need to speak up to protect kids like your daughter?
Yes, I do.
Because if they pretend this is all normal, or they're just afraid of somebody being upset at them, or whatever it is, whatever reason they're using to be silent, isn't it just helping evil people do this to kids?
Yes.
The government's complicity doesn't end there, though. Even the Pentagon is involved in this. The Department of Defense admits that their doctors are transitioning kids. One of these DoD doctors actually said that transitioning kids can cause psychotic illnesses to, quote, melt away. The only issue is that his own study using DoD treatment records told a different story.
Not only did his study find no significant psychological benefit to transition drugs for kids, but many kids' psychotropic drugs increased after taking transition drugs. The most pronounced increases in psychotropic medication were in antipsychotics and lithium. So surely the government stopped these experiments on children, right?
In fact, Klein and other DoD doctors, Noel Larson and Natasha Shvay, argued in the American Journal of Public Health that kids must be affirmed and immediately moved onto puberty blockers or hormones if they have dysphoria. Dr. Klein even claimed that kids as young as 7 can make this decision on their own.
He called this a human right for the child.
This is who the military has in charge of this issue.
Some major Pentagon doctors recently came out and they said that they believed that children had the ability to decide which gender they are, that they could change back and forth, and they also were promoting transitioning children. We've also found that they are, in fact, transitioning children. How did this happen within our own military that we've got doctors who are transitioning the children of our service members?
I think it's awful, it's reprehensible, and they should be fired for doing this. I think it's a crime against humanity to do this kind of stuff. The thing about a child making the consent is, how do you make a consent to remove your sexual organs if you've never used them? I don't even know what this is. A 7-year-old barely knows the difference between a boy. They probably have a vague idea of the difference between boys and girls, but they really don't have yet any kind of comprehension of how boys and girls interact sexually. And it's like, oh, you're just going to give up on that? That's not informed consent. The parents might be able to make informed consent, but I probably wouldn't let the parents consent to that for children, because the child has to make the consent. They have to be old enough to know what they're giving up. They also aren't informing them basically the urinary tract complications that go on and on and on.
Joe Biden has recently been saying our children, as in the US government has a stake in each of our children, and that they're not wholly ours as parents, but that they belong somehow to the government. Is that a slip of the tongue, or do you think that's intentional, that that's entered his message?
I think the language is very purposeful, and you remember Hillary Clinton, it takes a village. It isn't about the parents, it isn't about the individuals, it isn't about a mother and a father. Then there's a birthing person and maybe somebody else around sometimes. I mean, it is really about thinking that the traditional family unit, the traditional family values, the religion makes no difference.
Mental health issues should be no surprise among the kids affected by this social contagion. Dr. Lisa Littman, a former professor at Brown University School of Public Health, did a study of 256 trans-identifying teens that found 82% were girls. 62.5% had at least one other mental health diagnosis before identifying as trans. Nearly 40% had a friend group where the majority identified as transgender. Nearly 50% tried to isolate away from their family. 25% stopped hanging out with non-transgender friends. 86.7% showed an increase in social media or internet use. And to quote the study, 60% of the friend groups were known to mock people who were not transgender.
Despite the mental health issues that exist prior to identifying as transgender, one of the top methods used to induce guilt by trans activists who support child mutilation is citing a study from the Trevor Project. That study says that giving kids hormones for a sex change will reduce their suicide risk. What they don't tell you is that it wasn't a scientific study at all. It was a quiz which found youth through targeted ads and offered them $50 prizes to respond. The results also excluded data on the self-identified 36% of responding youth who did not want hormone therapy. They also used this desecration of science to say that puberty blockers would lower the suicide risk for kids too. I think it's safe to say that pharmaceutical company AbbVie got their money's worth when they donated $50,000 to the Trevor Project, since they make the drug Lupron that's given to kids as a puberty blocker. It's also given to pedophile child rapists to chemically castrate them, but I'm sure they don't want to talk about that.
The FDA has never approved these drugs to be used for transitioning.
Yet doctors still prescribe it and other so-called gender-affirming cure drugs off-label.
This is the very definition of an experiment, and it's being done on America's children. The drug companies AbbVie and Endo were asked by doctors to seek FDA approval for these drugs, but both declined. Many believe they want to avoid safety studies. Why isn't the media hounding these pharmaceutical companies, you might ask? Well, in 2020, pharmaceutical companies accounted for about 75% of the TV ad spend in America. That's why. Many describe what the Trevor Project is doing as convenience sampling. Convenience sampling involves using respondents who are convenient to the researcher. What is the cost of transitioning kids anyways? A Swedish study concluded that transgender people have increased suicide risk after transition. The study says sex-reassigned trans persons of both genders had approximately a 3-time higher risk of all-cause mortality than controls. Childhood transition can also result in micropenis, total sterilization, and the inability to ever orgasm. One well-known surgeon who transitions young people recently gave an interview where he admitted to needing the help of a robot to castrate a child and create a wound that they call an artificial vagina. I want you to listen and ask yourself, how is this different from any of the most evil medical experiments performed on children in the history of humanity?
That is very new is genital surgery in someone that has underwent pubertal suppression. You don't have enough tissue to line the vaginal canal, so you either have to take a skin graft or take skin from elsewhere or use an artificial product. The way that we're dealing with it is by using a robot. And we're basically performing intra-abdominal components of the surgery. So we're using peritoneum, which is the inner lining of the abdomen, to line most of the vaginal canal.
In the process of making this documentary, we tried to reach out to the left. We sat down with Jolene Vargas. She's a TikTok influencer with over 30 million likes. She practices something called gender creative parenting. Something happened that I didn't expect. She admitted something that stunned us. It was a silent knowing that what's going on online with this transgender social contagion is wrong. And some very sick people are profiting off it.
I think there is a big group of people out there who push back against this parenting style, who also push back against, people who are transitioning their children. They'll say, essentially that the internet is creating social contagion, that kids are on TikTok and they see 1,000 videos of kids who are saying that they're non-binary or whatever it is, and they're just following the trend. And do you think there's any truth to that?
You guys' questions. I love them. I will say another big reason why I took my kids offline is because there were a couple accounts who did center their accounts around their children and their children's transitions and things like that. And I started to realize that they were causing somewhat of a discredit to the community, because a lot of people obviously would assume they're only doing this for the clout. These people have millions of followers. Every video they post of their child and it has anything to do with their transition gets millions and millions of views. And essentially they're getting paid. And some of these accounts are doing ads with these kids.
They're making a lot of money.
Yeah. And so I didn't want to add to that discredit, because I feel like if I am sharing my kids, that side of the political spectrum does get to say, you're doing that for clout. And granted, there are still some people who are like, you're doing it for clout, because even though you're not sharing your kids, you're still gaining clout from talking about your kids. My son, we did film with Disney before the pandemic, but while we were filming, he had like so many rights. Like we had to get a Coogan account, which meant the money would go to him. Most of the money would go to his account, and that he had like a tutor on site, even though he was only like 4 at the time. And that tutor made sure that if he was hungry, he ate. If he needed a nap, he took a nap. She was there to like be there for him. And it made me realize like there's nothing like that for internet. Like for social media parents, there's no Coogan accounts, there's nobody on set making sure that the children are not working 10, 12 hours a day. And then you see these parents doing like ads and stuff, and you're just like, that child is making the money.
This movement isn't hiding its aims. A drag queen named Little Miss Hot Mess made that clear in an academic paper they wrote, explicitly recognizing that pride and drag for kids was meant to be political. The sudden inclusion of kids in pride and attending drag shows has nothing to do with tolerance or acceptance. It's not only about sexualizing them either. It's about creating lifelong left-wing voters. Like other activists, Little Hot Mess ghosted us after scheduling an interview with us.
You were such an awesome mom for bringing their kid out to a family-friendly drag show, ladies and gentlemen.
Drag queen storytime and drag shows for kids are a political operation at their core, meant to divide society, sexualize kids, and destroy the innocence of children. That much seemed clear to us, but we wanted to make sure. So we sat down with a Nashville drag queen named Veronica Electronica.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I have a question for you guys. What do you guys do when you're not in front of the camera?
We're with our family.
What are your last names?
Starbuck.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to end the interview
Why is that?
because I feel very uncomfortable. Can I ask the cameras to get turned off for just a second? I just want to have a real conversation. I think that when you start equivocating a live performance like drag, that is not an adult-themed art form. It is not adult content. It's not a 21 and up XXX content. It's just It's not.
We're concerned about children's safety and being exposed to sexually explicit adults who want to take off their clothes and grind and gyrate in front of children. Could you at least denounce that?
I am unable to.
I wasn't going to do this, and this isn't like a thing. This is the stuff I have a problem with. And you're probably not okay with this. The kid's right there in the background. That's not an enriched child. They're not learning something from
At
this.
the end of the day, that really isn't showing any part of the body that would be considered as illegal.
If I show you the full video, you will see it.
But we have many things that are happening in our state and our country that are jeopardizing the lives of children, like guns.
You're deflecting the conversation, though, and not answering the question. So you cannot denounce behavior that is sexually explicit around children.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying I am declining to comment.
And even for children.
Oh, it's for the kids. I get it. We have laws protecting children.
Have you seen any sexually explicit drag shows marketed as all ages for kids that you would denounce or think that are a problem and that you want to distance yourself from?
No.
You know this is wrong.
So that photograph could very easily have been taken at the 50-yard line of the Titans game.
I would have the same problem.
They don't wear G-strings.
Well, but they do. They do.
They
and
wear G-strings and spread their legs in children's faces?
Well, they maybe not wear G-strings, but I don't know if that's a G-string.
It is.
The soundbite of that photograph shows a glimpse of a moment in probably a moving picture. I'm sure that person wasn't spread eagle there for any.
Do you want me to pull it up and show you?
Do you denounce behavior that was sexually explicit like that, of somebody spreading their legs, showing their G-string to a child audience in a show that was explicitly marketed as all ages, family friendly, just morally? Then would you spread your legs in front of a child like that?
No, not on purpose. As a person of faith, I feel personally attacked for the stances that you have and the views that you have toward me, my coworkers, and my community.
The amount of times I've been told that I hate drag queens and I want them all to die is ridiculous. I want nothing but good things for people. I just don't want kids to be exposed to sexually explicit stuff.
I think that your line of questioning was very misleading.
Every question we've asked has been respectful, has been about trying to understand that perspective. If these conversations are shut down and we were not going to get anywhere, this interview was not about us, but the interview was to hear your perspective. This is your opportunity to tell people that you at least denounce the sexually explicit, egregious behavior for children.
Well, that
do you
is
still
something
think,
that
regardless of the laws, you don't have a problem with that behavior in front of children because it's protected by free speech? Is that what you're saying?
You know this is wrong.
So I feel like
It's just a very simple question.
Well, I'm just an entertainer.
You're a professional drag queen. And that's what we wanted to hear from.
I am, but just because I'm a professional drag queen doesn't make me an expert in some of the legal conversations.
We
that
never
we're
asked you any legal
No
questions.
legal question.
So you cannot denounce behavior that is sexually explicit around children.
I don't have to.
If you want, he can walk you out. It's not the best area.
The area. I do not have a mic on me.
Watch your head.
I can see. Have a wonderful afternoon. Each to take.
Oh yeah, get it.
Psychology Today reports that 99% of child sexual abuse involves grooming. The methods to groom a child include selecting a victim. A pedophile named Jack Reynolds gave what's now a famous interview where he was asked how he selected his victims.
How did you get them alone?
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were. When we were on the ballparks or on the gym floor, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child.
Predators admit that they select the vulnerable. Those with little supervision online are prime targets. That's one way predators gain access to them. Then those predators develop trust. This can be done many ways, but one is to give rewards, such as attention or likes on social media. Step 4 is to desensitize the child to sexual content and physical contact. Look no further again than the social media algorithms to do that. Step 5 is what's called post-abuse maintenance behaviors. Those can look like persuading a minor that it's normal to be sexually exploited. Social media does this as well when a kid sees that sexualized girls get all the likes. Social media isn't just sexualizing our kids. It's also a vector of attack in the child trafficking trade. To learn more about this, we talked to someone who was sold online over 1,000 times, beginning at age 14.
A big news outlet, The Atlantic, ran a headline saying child trafficking essentially is a conspiracy theory. Is that true?
No, that's not true. I wish that was the case, to be honest. I wish that that was really what was going on. But in reality, as I work with hundreds of survivors, not only in my state, but all across the country, no, it's happening. When we look at our stats, it says that 80% of victims are US citizens. I think sometimes we get this idea that it comes from third world countries, and it's not. It's happening in our own backyard. As I work in safe houses, as I run support groups, the survivors are from here. I've had 2 survivors in the last 5 years that I've been working with survivors that 2 of them came from a different country. 2. All of the survivors I currently work with are from the United States. When I look at with the idea that it's only happening somewhere else, it's not happening in America. In my story of exploitation, I was sold in over 12 states total. 12 states. But it wasn't just me. There was a whole trafficking ring. There were other children, 12, 13, 14-year-old. And I think that in some cases, we begin to think that some people believe it's just prostitution. Kids cannot consent to prostitution. Our kids are being trafficked. It's interesting because I think that that same thought process is a part of what allowed me to stay in modern day slavery as long as I did, because people didn't think it was happening.
So Keelan, as a survivor of child trafficking, tell us a little bit about the process that yourself and many other kids go through called grooming.
Yeah. So the grooming process is very intricate and something that can take either a couple weeks to a couple of years, depending on the type of trafficking. If we're looking at CSEC, which is a commercial sexual exploitation of children, it's going to be maybe a shorter process. But if it's familial trafficking, which is it's happening in the home, it's happening by a guardian, that can take up to a couple of years. So with my grooming process, my trafficker took a couple of months, and I was actually boyfriended into the life of exploitation. And what grooming process really looks like is the perpetrator taking the time to fully understand what are the vulnerabilities. Where can I enter into your life to then manipulate you into the actions that the perpetrators want you to do?
When kids are groomed today, where is that happening?
Oh, all over. I think that that's the scariest part in the world that we live in. When we look at the grooming process, the easiest way that kids are being groomed right now are on social media and online platforms. I think with COVID, it's kind of increased the nature of kids sitting behind the screen without parental control and guidance, which is a scary place for kids to be.
If I told a parent, would you feel comfortable dropping off your kid at a park where you knew there were 3 or 4 pedophiles hanging around the park and just take the chance that nothing's going to happen to them? Every parent would say, absolutely not. That's crazy. But aren't we essentially doing the same thing online? We're just dropping them off with almost no supervision while a bunch of pedophiles hang out around them?
Absolutely. I think it would be crazy to think that they're not on there. I think the hard part is, as parents, is sometimes we kind of run away from that idea because it makes us uncomfortable. When I think about my exploitation and starting as being trafficked when I was 14, my buyers knew how old I was, and they purposely purchased me because I was underage.
As we listened to Keelan, I was struck by the fact that she was the same age when she was first sold that our oldest daughter is now. It made my heart sink. Who could do this to a child? How could this have been prevented? So I asked her. I watched this video where a pedophile who's in jail was asked, what did you look for in your victims? And what he responded with was honest and kind of jarring. And he said, I looked for the kids who had weak fathers or no fathers at all. Is that what you've seen, is the kids who are
most at risk are the ones with no fathers around or fathers who are weak and are not going to stand up for their child.
I think that is definitely vulnerability. When we look at single parent homes, I was raised in a single parent home.
What do dads need to do to step up to make sure that their kids are not those kids who end up vulnerable to online exploitation?
Yeah, they have to be a great example of what a real healthy father relationship looks like. I think a lot of times in relationships, we always seek after what we've seen in the home. So if we're in homes that are broken, we often find that in psychology, you continue that cycle in broken relationships over and over again. And so how do you show up for your kids, even if you're not in the same home with the other parent, right? Like sometimes that's just not viable for everybody. Parents go through divorces, but it's still a father's job to show up for their child and be able to sit in those very hard spaces, but have honest conversations. So there's a lack of understanding when it comes to the kind of the structure that a good father brings into that. So when you don't have a parent in the home, what we find a lot of the times is that children are missing it. So if you're not getting in the home, they're going to seek that validation in outside sources.
The harm for kids doesn't end with the internet, big pharma, Wall Street, academia, entertainment, or even our own government. The very food that they eat and tap water they drink is cause for concern too. Atrazine's a pesticide that's in much of the tap water kids drink today and the food that they eat. When Berkeley professor of integrative biology Tyrone B. Hayes investigated atrazine, he did an experiment on frogs where he introduced atrazine to the water. The result was that many of the male frogs turned gay and mated with other male frogs. 1 in 10 actually began to produce eggs, and 75% of them were chemically castrated. So what is atrazine doing to our children? No one seems to want to invest in finding out the answer to that. One limited study on grown men produced results showing that men exposed to atrazine had very poor semen quality, while a rodent study found that atrazine could pose a cancer risk, and atrazine isn't alone. Similar studies have found other toxins in non-organic foods and tap water. After reviewing Tyrone Hayes' atrazine study on frogs, it got us thinking about how often people we interviewed brought up masculinity.
I think there's an attack on masculinity. I think that it's watering these men down.
Yeah, most people are like looking towards celebrities and they're looking up to people like Santa Smith. Like that's not even a picture of masculinity. It's just a very, very toxic culture.
It is extremely hard and challenging to find like-minded, godly, masculine men. We just have a generation of weak men.
We need men to like rise up and become men.
You mentioned boys being boys. That's how a lot of people see boys looking at porn. And this is sort of an interesting, weird thought I had a long time ago, and it's that somehow there was like a flip in the matrix where we switched up the way we thought about this. Because if you caught a boy outside and he's staring in a girl's window watching her change, you'd be like, he's a creep. What a weirdo. I'm calling the police. But if you see him peering in on her through his computer screen and he's paying $2 on OnlyFans, suddenly it's just boys being boys, getting out some weird urge. But the truth is, if you go back in time, these were seen as the least masculine qualities you could have. Is you were so emasculated that the only way for you to ever see a woman naked was to be voyeuristic. It's now flipped to that being empowering in some way. How did that happen?
Oh, that is a good question. That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Me neither. I don't understand.
I think it's interesting because we stopped requiring men to be men.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly where it stems. We stopped raising the bar for them to navigate world in a different way. And the same thing with women, right? Like there was a standard, but now we've lowered the standards to it's okay to be super sexualized. When back in the day, that was not okay. Like,
not just okay, but it's better. Yeah. It's better and it's desirable. And they lie and pretend that men are going to want you then. And this will probably be a controversial take, but it's true. Most men, if they want to get married to a woman, they're not looking for the person who's super sexual. They might go on their page or whatever, but they're actually putting them in a totally different category, and it's not wife category. Mm-hmm. And if we're thinking about the context, yes, there's anomalies. Some people don't want to get married. Some people don't want to have kids. They can do what they want to do. The vast majority of people want to get married and have kids one day. And in that context, we're lying to kids. These kids are crying out to us, aren't they? I mean, do you see that in the trafficking survivors you work with? Are they crying out to us to do something and to act like adults, and for men to be men and dads to step up and women to be that nurturing, empathetic voice that's finding out like, what's going on in your heart? Are you okay?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the one thing that's missing and that creates the vulnerability in a lot of survivors is they don't have that. But I do think that it's the men's stance that really will create the difference in our children being trafficked or not, because they will stand in the way of the vulnerability that's happening if they're being exposed to it.
We're at this point where it seems like nothing's real that used to be real anymore. And it almost feels like the medical industry and our schools are abusing kids. Am I wrong to think that?
Oh, no, I think you're completely right. It almost feels like they're test subjects. I think what's happening is they are doing tests and we're not going to see the effects until about 10 years later when we're sitting here and we're like, we were completely wrong. But at the expense of who? Like
Kids.
at the expense of our children.
Yeah.
And that's it. No child should have to go through that. When I think about me in high school, like I was a tomboy. There was nothing in me playing sports and watching video games and playing comics. Like there was nothing in that space that was like, well, maybe you're a boy.
Right.
Like maybe you should change your gender. Like there was nothing. I didn't have to deal with that. But you're right. Now we've gotten into this narrative of like, well, if you feel that way, then you should change it.
Porn is another weapon in this war on children.
Lori Petito.
Why is it important to have sex ed on Pornhub?
Well, it's important to have sex ed everywhere.
Are you concerned that having sex ed on Pornhub might, entice minors to come to the site to have access to sex ed?
Absolutely not. And when it was created, we never advertised it outside of Pornhub.
Was it ever promoted on social media or anywhere else in the news?
No, we don't really promote it.
Pornhub Sex Ed is here. Today we're going to talk about healthy masturbation habits, the proper way to use a condom, female anatomy.
What is normal and what is not for people with a penis?
What age should sex ed start for kids?
I believe sex ed should start in kindergarten, in the sex education, because like you say the word sex, unfortunately, a lot of people think, oh my God, they're going to teach my children how to have sex.
Well, I think they think of sex, Do you believe, some of these, schools of thought believe that children are inherently sexual? Is that something that you believe starts at a young age, or at what point do you feel like?
Of course. Have you never seen a 18-month-old masturbating?
No, I haven't.
With the hands on their pants, or little boys, they touch themselves because it feels good. Their penises get hard. All little boys ask, hey, look, mommy, my penis is hard. Like, why is my penis hard?
Do you think pornography that portrays, child simulation, like with women or men dressed as young children or simulating childlike behaviors, drive the pedophilic behavior and tendencies?
No, I don't think so.
A Pornhub representative, I think in the, she has a big account, influencer, but also as a spokesperson at Pornhub, that made a comment about having sex with teenagers.
Would you even do that?
This 13-year-old, I think
He could have easily passed for
like,
15.
okay, if he wasn't necessarily like an old looking 13, you look at him and he's definitely a child. He's just like really, like he had the perfect tan.
A child
and
doing
this
adult
and
that shouldn't be considered statutory rape, and like it's consensual, and
no one would
I don't
consider
think
that
there's-
rape except maybe his mom. And that's only if she's like a total.
I think there's not one person that would think that's abuse and would just think how lucky that kid is.
Pretty much.
I mean, and we're talking about Asa and this 13-year-old kid.
Would you feel morally dirty if I went to the other room?
Yeah.
And this kid, like, would you
No.
look at me different?
Yeah.
Okay, not maybe would you look at me different, but like, would you think that I'm doing something wrong? Would you feel bad for the
I would be
kid?
so proud of both of you guys. Because you go to prison and you really. We're not talking about the law right now. Hold on. What are you, a like
Snitch?
do-gooder or something? I'm a snitch. Are you a snitch? Oh yeah. Would you snitch on us?
It sounds like you would, because
Yeah.
you're so sure we'd go to jail.
Yeah. We would never go to jail. I would just hurt you guys. What are you talking about? What are you, the protector of 13-year-olds or something? I think somebody has.
What a nerd.
Is that something that you support or endorse?
It depends. Again, the age of sexual consent is 16 years old. So let's go with the law. If there's no position of authority over that 16-year-old, then legally they can choose to have sex with anybody they want.
Do you think it's problematic that Pornhub doesn't require age consent?
I am not speaking for that. I don't know the full story. I only know your version, so I don't want to ask.
I don't have a version. It's just a fact. Pornhub doesn't verify age or consent. Are you familiar with the work, of Dr. Alfred Kinsey?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Do you find his work to be instrumental in shaping your views or modern sexuality framework?
Well, I think that he did the biggest, one of the biggest large scale studies. So, I mean, obviously it opened the door to looking at so many different aspects of sexuality. He was the first really especially to look at back then called deviant sexuality or fetishes, or like people really were able to talk about the range of sexuality out there. So certainly he opened that door.
Porn companies seem to have no interest in protecting kids because they know it means less traffic. So in Virginia, where they've passed a law to mandate age verification, Pornhub has chosen instead to shut down in the state. A gamble made in hopes that Virginia politicians will give in and change course. Parents could fight this by rallying a wave of legislation in other states requiring age verification for porn until it's impossible for companies like Pornhub to do business without verifying age and consent. Social media companies should face similar restrictions to ensure minors aren't exposed to porn or exploited on their sites. This is all in our control if the adults in the room stop putting their porn viewing habits in front of child safety and do their job. This generation also reports the highest uses of birth control and psychiatric drugs we've ever seen. A recent study showed use of birth control was linked with higher rates of depression.
I saw a statistic the other day that really bothered me too, not just the failing numbers in academics, but the absolute crushing levels of depression and despair. This poll was on 8th graders and 12th graders, and we have near 50% level answering yes to questions like, my life has no meaning. I don't want to get up in the morning. I don't think life is worth living. This does not bode well for our future in this country. We're taking away all of the things that throughout history have given life meaning. Family, faith, a belief in personal achievement, a belief that you could do things and that you matter, and that faith matters and your family matters and that your parents are looking out for the best for you. All of those messages are being taken away, and look at the levels of depression and despair and just sadness and loneliness in our kids.
We're looking at a generation that is the most faithless we've had in America. They report the highest levels of not believing in God that we've ever seen. Are you afraid that that need to believe in something is being replaced with worshiping wokeness?
Yes, absolutely. Several other people have pointed out, especially during COVID, when kids are spending so much time online and the messages that they're getting. And a lot of times the natural feelings that kids have during puberty or tween years, where they're uncomfortable in their body, or they're feeling lonely, or they feel like nobody likes them, they're finding this group online who are telling them, well, that's because you're trans or you're this, and your parents don't understand you, but we'll be your family now. And it's disturbing that, there are many teachers and counselors who are trying to then affirm these confused kids, as opposed to, years ago, you would, find your group in your neighborhood or in your family or in your church. Now they're being told that the answer to these feelings is to somehow be medicalized for a lifetime. These kids probably aren't being told that once you go down that path, you're a medical patient for an entire lifetime.
And
you're a slave to big pharma.
Yeah, the alternative is being a slave to big pharma in a different direction, being put on, antidepressants at a super young age instead of dealing with whatever the problem is, and maybe there's an argument that some kids may need some sort of pharmaceutical intervention in some rare cases and stuff. But I think most of the problems people in my generation, your generation, dealt with, if you were sad or something like that, these were dealt with in real life. You didn't pop a pill to fix it. It was, human interaction. It was going outside. It was changing your environment, exercising, all types of different things to try to deal with a problem first before you jump to that. And it seems like we're putting kids on these tracks that all end with either, big pharma or some sort of woke endeavor that's supposed to push them, in the direction of leftism.
If we look at, cultural Marxism or socialism throughout history, it always ends in authoritarianism. It always ends, as you know, from Cuba, bloodshed, China, under Mao, Pol Pot, Russia. Once you sort of break down the family unit and you break down the things that make life meaningful, like traditions and like values and faith, that it becomes very easy for governments to take over.
They also report the highest levels of depression, mental health issues, and lack of faith in God that we've ever seen. It's never been clearer that this generation desperately needs God, something to believe in, and an aspirational goal for their life.
Some might bristle at calling this a war on children, but let's go through a checklist. In wars, there's propaganda, and I don't think anybody can argue that propaganda isn't being used. There's weapons used to mutilate people. Look no further than the images of surgeries being done on kids today to confirm that that's happening. Wars have soldiers willing to kidnap, maim, and destroy for their ideology.
And wars have victims.
We have to use our voices, use our levers of power, take risks, set boundaries, be willing to be unpopular or called a prude, embrace family and traditionalism, embrace the olds that the modern red guard of wokeness wants you to reject. Embrace the outdoors and human connection. Embrace monogamy and marriage. Embrace being your child's leader, not their best friend. Your kids need you, and so do kids who don't have anyone fighting for them, because there's one thing about this war on children that we haven't discussed. Wars have winners and losers. If evil wins, then all of our kids lose. The question we face now is whether good or evil will win this war. Who wins is up to us. It's up to every one of you. Will we make changes to save our own children? Will we wake up friends and families to do the same? Will we return to a time where adults did their greatest duty of protecting childhood innocence? Will we begin to truly hold predators accountable with long prison sentences or the death penalty instead of slaps on the wrist? Will we rise to the occasion or be a footnote in history where the winning side of evil laughs about our naive silence as they indoctrinated our kids? The choice is ours. We can choose to be warriors for children or bury our heads as the next generation is influenced by people who hate our values, hate our faith, and hate the foundations of our country. We choose to raise warrior children and to be warriors for children. What do you choose?
The enemy is closing in. It seems there's no way we can win. A generation lost and drowning in our sin. We've built these gods of gold. Now they're coming for the young and old to take our power and control, turning us to stone. Silence led to apathy. Cowards living comfortably, just thinking of ourselves, just doing what was easy. We can't go back, we can't rewind. It's gone too far, they've crossed the line. These mountains are coming down. We're standing on crumbling ground, and we go down in the landslide until we have no more enemies to fight. Yeah, we go